Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Sacco for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be, along with all of the other great Pistons content creators out there. Before we get into today's mailbag episode, I just want to give the viewers, the listeners, a little bit of insight into what will be coming up over the next few weeks. We have plans for an all trivia episode where we'll play 3 different games, and me, Omari, and Wes will take turns hosting each of those trivia games. We plan on trying to get the NBA Daily hosts over here for an NBA offseason roundtable where I'll throw out a question like, what was the best individual move of the offseason? LeBron James cannot be the answer here, or things like that. And we'll go around with them and with O2 discussing those answers. We plan on having a national guest to come on and talk about the Pistons offseason and where they're at right now. And then we also hope to have O2 and O1 have their annual episode that was really, really fun. I think last year was the first time we did that, right? O2, you and your dad got a chance to podcast together.
Yeah, that was the first time. And you all, if you have been a long time listener or drop in the chat, you know, my dad's a pretty regular contributor here, long time Pistons fan. So we'll definitely try to line that one up for the second annual, what you say, 01 and 02 pod. I like that.
Yeah, I hope he's okay with that. As long as your dad's okay with being 01 and he's all right with that, I kind of like it. But today we are doing a mailbag. We appreciate everybody who gave us questions over on Twitter or Blue Sky. If you're here with us live, I know we're like middle of the day right here, right around lunchtime. I get it. People have to work. I understand. Hopefully everybody's okay. Wes was telling us about some storms in Michigan yesterday, so I hope everybody's okay. I know it's hot as heck here in Kansas. I don't know what the weather is like and temperatures other places, but hopefully everybody's doing well. And real quick, before we get into the mailbag, my point was, if you have a question, drop it in the comments. We will get to those as well. Any of these comments here live or questions here live, but we are almost to 250 episodes. 243 today. We are that close to 250, which is just crazy.
Yeah, 250 is a big number. It feels like we just did like the 100th episode, maybe like a year and a half ago, which is crazy. So we'll have to do something to commemorate the big 2-5. I don't know what yet. We have a few weeks here to brainstorm, but 250 is insane, man. I mean, that's such a, I don't even check the actual number of episodes we've done.
I don't either.
Because it's just, I know it's in the 200 something. If you guys have any ideas for us to celebrate 250, shout them out, because we've definitely got to do something.
Yeah, Fly Monk 321 says, you bringing your coach back, Bryce? That was a heck of a show. I have thought about that. Coach Jones, obviously somebody very special in my life, and I thought that was a pretty good episode for people. Obviously very different, no Pistons content in that one whatsoever, but you know, in terms of this portion of the offseason, I felt like it was the right time for that. And selfishly for me, it was a lot of fun to get on here and talk about that. So let's get into the mailbag. Wes put these in order for us, so we'll go through them. I will just apologize at the top if I mispronounce your name. I am so sorry. I promise I will do my best. If I do, hit me with a DM or something. I promise I will try to fix it moving forward. But this is from Stuart Mora. The core, so the trio of Cade, Jalen Duren, and Ausar Thompson, have yet to enter their prime. Watching them grow individually and as teammates is a great part of being a fan. In your eyes, what would successful growth look like for each of them this season? So I'll start with you, O2. What is growth? I think you can take it individually. Also be interesting maybe what you think collectively with that group of 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think collective group is just sustaining what you've started, right? Going from, okay, like we could put a playoff team together to proving that you're the core that is worth investing into and building around, given that that's what the front office is trying to do now. They're trying to re-sign Duren. They want to extend Ausar. Obviously, Cade is here to stay. So I think that's collective growth in my mind. It's just continuing to move down the direction that you've started, going from 44 to 60. And then next step for them, they would like a finals run or even better, a championship. Individually, I think it's easier maybe for Ausar and Duren. For Ausar, I think it's obviously, you know, some growth on the offensive end, whether that's the ball handling aspects, spacing the floor a bit better or a lot better, I guess. You want to see something, I think, moving in the right direction on the offensive end because you already know what he's going to give you defensively. You know he can push the pace in transition. So, what could he do in the half court specifically, whether that's shooting or handling the ball? Let's start with Ausar, and I'll go ahead and give it back to you. We've talked a lot about his jumper on here, but sort of what do you put more emphasis on next season from a growth standpoint?
So he's just incredible defensively. I was thinking about this today. I do think Ausar is probably a year-over-year first-team all-defensive guy. I don't know if he ever wins a DPOY, depending on how many years Victor Wembanyama is eligible, and then you still have other players like Chet Holmgren, and other players will continue to emerge. But I think he's a year-over-year first-team all-defensive player. I think offensively for me, I don't want to say I've given up on, but I don't even think I'm as locked into the three-point shooting as other people are for Ausar. To me, I think the biggest, what that was from Gabe says, Ausar has got to get 3 corner threes up a game next year. I understand this idea. I truly do. I just think that if I were giving Ausar advice, what I would like to see is actually hey, I can attack a closeout to 15 feet and knock down that jumper. I can attack a defender not guarding me at the 3-point line by dribbling into a handoff with Cade Cunningham. Being able to take advantage of the way defenders are defending him, I think would be my biggest offensive growth for Ausar Thompson, along with potential growth as just playing as the true primary creator. Because one way that you don't hurt floor spacing when you're a non-floor spacer is by having the ball in your hands, by initiating offense, by being involved in the action. So I think that's more for me what I think is realistic. Him being able to attack defenders that aren't closing out to him, that are playing off of him, that would be my biggest individual growth for Ausar Thompson.
Yeah, we're pretty much aligned there. For Duren, I feel like it's more of a nuanced conversation because he's already grown in ways that maybe weren't as easy to predict or project. I mean, becoming a 20-point scorer, maintaining that 65% clip. I think 2 years ago, if we were told that he would be a 20 and 11 guy, we probably would have assumed a bit more shot diversity than we've seen. But he's just an elite finisher, cleans everything up underneath the rim. For me, it's can you continue to extend that range out a bit more? We saw him dabble with the mid-range more than he ever has last season. Can you consistently knock down that 14-foot jumper? Can you continue to find ways to weaponize the threat of, your handle, taking opposing bigs off of the dribble? Because those aspects of his game seem sustainable from my eyes. But more importantly for him, I think, is on the defensive end. Just continue to grow as a rim protector. I thought last season was his best defensively. I don't think the Pistons sustained the league's number 2 defense if their starting center is a bad defender. But he wasn't their best rim protector. That was Isaiah Stewart. And I think from a pure disruption standpoint, you get a lot more from Paul Reed. So with Duren, it's, it doesn't just have to be the raw block or steals numbers. It's not that. It's just, can you continue to take positive strides, protect the rim, help your team sustain their impact on that end? Because with Isaiah Stewart going, that's going to be extremely important.
Real quick, back to Ausar. It's Caleb's ask, is there a non-3-point shooting archetype currently in the league that comes to mind for your vision of Ausar offensively? It would be a little bit of a combination of what Draymond Green does offensively for the Warriors. Now, the difference there is Draymond plays with Steph Curry, who's really, really good at running off the actions that I'm describing. And so this would be a little bit of, hey, Cade Cunningham coming into these DHOs and get actions and those type of things. The name that I don't think people are going to like me saying, but I believe is better offensively than what he gets credit for, especially in the regular season, is Dyson Daniels. Like if he could do what Dyson Daniels does offensively in the regular season, and I will just give you the numbers. And again, this is a lot of eye test for me. I've been saying this for 2 years now that I don't think Dyson Daniels is as good defensively as what a lot of people think, but he's better offensively. Daniels was just as much of a non-3-point shooter as Ausar was this last year, but he averaged 12 points and 6 assists a game in the regular season, and he shot 52% from the field, just like Ausar. Ausar was at 10 points and 3 assists. I really like a lot of Dyson Daniels does the things that I'm talking about here. Now, back to Jalen Duren, I agree with you. I think it's the defensive impact. If he could take another step, and we don't have to get into the full conversation around Jalen Duren right now, but I think it has gone a little bit too negative. And I do think his defense is now better than what people are talking about it, or what I see a lot of people talking about it. And I've always been one of the bigger critics of his defense early in his career. I just did a breakdown on the Substack. It's completely free, guys. I watched what was his best game in the regular season according to Basketball Reference game score. Happened to be against the Cleveland Cavaliers in late February. Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley both playing. Donovan Mitchell, James Harden did not. And then game 4 of the playoffs. And I compared those two games. You could see what some of the changes were offensively. I didn't think there was a whole lot of difference defensively. I thought he was quite solid in the regular season, and I thought he was quite solid in the playoffs. Now, to your point, O2, especially without Isaiah Stewart, he needs to be better than that, especially depending on what the contract ends up being. So for me, I think the biggest growth for Jalen Duren is on the defensive end.
Yeah, for him, it's just being the guy. I think to an extent, Isaiah Stewart is giving him some cover as a rim protector, but I also think that it gave him something to aspire toward, right? Just seeing the effort and just the amount of energy that, Stu expended on that end of the floor night in and night out. So, yeah, for Duren, I think that's not only dictating next season, but just his career in general in Detroit. And I think his inherent value as well, much of that will be tied into the defensive end. And what helps with him is that he's already such a good rebounder. He's already such a good finisher that, that solves a lot of other fit issues that you may anticipate or foresee. You could build around him in that sense. So, yeah, I think we're in lockstep there. For him, it's all about the defensive end.
Did you give your Cade Cunningham part of this?
Did not give my Cade Cunningham part of this.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You can go ahead and go first.
The only thing I was going to say is, and people are going to get mad at me now, and I promise I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, but I do think seeing Cade play more off the ball would be growth. That's one thing I would like to see from him. Now, this isn't, hey, Abuka Okori should be the starting point guard and all of that. I'm not saying completely take the ball out of his hands. There is some nuance in this conversation, but watching what Jalen Brunson did in the playoffs really has me believing in this for players like Cade Cunningham, where, hey, go play off the ball, run a zoom action, relocation, get some things that are a little bit easier where you don't have to do all of the work. And so I am a believer in playing somebody that can be a primary creator with him on the floor. I still think that person has to really be able to play off the ball, though, because I'm not just completely taking the ball out of Cade Cunningham's hands, but I think that would be one thing for me. The three-point shooting obviously ended up at 34% in the regular season. He shot it at 40% in the playoffs on real volume. But I think that would be the thing for me, is some more actions off the ball for Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, I think off ball, but also just general growth as a shooter as well. Just because the three-point shooting has kind of seesawed for him throughout his career. But especially last season, I thought he got off to a slower start and steadily got better as the year went on. And then he was almost a lights out shooter in the playoffs, right? I mean, he was hitting all the 3-pointers you would want him to be able to hit, coming out of pick and rolls. So if he could continue to trend toward a 37, 38% shooter, I think the off-ball aspect comes into that a bit, just because the more he's getting easier catch and shoots without having to self-create as much, the better that'll be for his overall numbers. But just continue moving forward in that direction. I thought Cade addressed a lot of his weaknesses last year, as far as just being a more consistent and purposeful defender, his turnovers being cut down, especially relative to his assists and how much he handles the ball. But if he could just continue to take steps forward as a three-point shooter, that would really round out the one aspect of his game that I wouldn't call it a weakness, because he can shoot, but it's not quite as strong as some of the other areas.
I just want to shout out Nick Chuck here. He asked about Ausar and Jalen Duren, one offensive skill to work on this offseason. What would it be? He said that for him, it would be an 18-footer for Duren and a little post-up 12-footer for Ausar. I feel like we really touched on that question already, so I wanted to shout out Nick for the question, but I do think we'll move on to Zach Erickson's question. I thought this one was really interesting. How many three-point attempts per game will Detroit take in the 26-27 season? They had 30.9 last year, and then that was actually less than the year before, where it was 35.4. His guess was 36. So back up closer to what it was 2 years ago. For reference, they were 29th in three-point attempt rate last season. They were 22nd the year before. So based on where this roster is at right now, O2, where do you think that three-point attempt rate will end up being?
Yeah, I think they'll be around 20th league-wide. I think last year, a lot of that just resulted from the change in roster makeup where you had two super high-volume guys in Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway, and then you essentially went to just Duncan Robinson. And the other guys that came in, like Javonte Green and Karras, they're just not taking threes nearly to the same rate as the guys who were before them. So now this year you have Isaiah Joe with Duncan, and he's going to get a lot of three-pointers up. I think having Kevin Huerter on the roster year-round potentially could help in that area, although he does play it inside pretty well too. John Collins, I think maybe a bit more of a willing three-point shooter than Tobias in some ways, given that, Tobias really likes to attack the mid-range. And I'm curious to see what that looks like over the course of a full season, because I don't think their three-point rates are really that significantly different. But just adding Isaiah Joe is going to make that number go north. So I would put them about where they were 2 years ago with Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway.
I agree. I think they end up right around 20th in three-point attempt rate, depending on pace of play, stuff like that. I think that 36 number that Zach brought up is probably where I would be. Next question from Philip Shaw. With all the big player movements, the Pistons are being left out of the Eastern Conference title narrative, even though they won 60 games last year. Assuming Jalen Duren is signed, is this the roster that opens the season, or can we expect another move? What do you think, Omari, in terms of another move before the start of the regular season, assuming Jalen Duren comes back on some sort of contract extension or I guess even the qualifying offer? But Jalen Duren is on the roster.
Yeah, things could always change leading up to the season, but right now I feel like this mostly will be the roster that we're looking at for next season. They do still have 16 players, including Duren, so they're going to have to part ways with somebody. I'm not sure who that will be or how that's resolved. So there's going to be at least one more adjustment going into the season. But beyond that, if the question is, do we see like a Zach LaVine type of acquisition or something along those lines? I would be surprised to see that at this point.
Yeah, as you mentioned there, as Gabe says, there has to be some sort of move, right? They're going to end up with 16 players on contracts. I don't know that. I think Paul Reed's and Duncan Robinson's have some non-guarantees, right? But those players are players we assume to either be starting in Duncan Robinson's case, for example, or Paul Reed being the backup big. I just don't think those are guys that you're going to waive. So there could be a trade, a 2-for-1 trade. Maybe you just move off one player into a trade exception and get a second-round pick or something like that back. But in general, I think I agree with you that this is essentially the roster. To me, the vision from Trajan in the front office is depth and the ability to make a trade during the regular season up to the deadline, all of that. Last one here before we go to break. Did the Pistons err by pushing for the playoffs 2 seasons ago instead of trying their luck in the lottery one last time? Asking because they have not been able to secure a second star to pair with Cade and look to be in danger of being stuck at the level of a second-round playoff team. This was from Lakeshore Nick. The one thing I will say here is, while I do agree they need the second scoring option on this team, I do think they have the ability to go get that. They have all of their first-round picks moving forward. They have all of these second-round picks. They have expiring contracts, especially when you get to the deadline. I don't think they're in a place where they can't go get that number 2 scoring option if he isn't on the roster. The only thing for me is they just are in a place now where they have to be careful about the contracts they hand out to Jalen Duren, Ausar Thompson, because that could then make that more difficult, right? If you tie up $80-90 million to Jalen Duren and Ausar Thompson and still need a number 2 scoring option, that gets a lot tougher than if you only have $65 or $70 million tied up to those 2 players. So I think that's the situation they're in terms of potentially needing that number 2 scorer, Omari.
Yeah, they're extremely well positioned now to go and get that guy. I think better than they have been in a while, even with, the bigger numbers contract-wise for Duren and Ausar coming in. Just because they have sort of those auxiliary salaries that you need to go get a 35 million guy or a 40 million guy or whatever that number ends up being. I don't think they missed the boat on getting that guy. I think timing wise, they're right in the middle of their window now to go and do that. So, no, I don't feel like they've missed any boats or, they should have did something sooner or, maybe they did and it was too early. I think they've done this pretty organically. They've kept their flexibility. And if they want to go get a guy before the February trade deadline, I think they're, at least from a pure contract standpoint, they're pretty well positioned to do that. The draft picks are another story because you do have some teams out there that, just have more draft capital. But a lot of those same teams probably would not be looking to make those same types of trades, like the Thunder and Spurs, right? Those are two teams I feel like they're pretty settled into their rosters and, they've got some second apron issues to keep in mind as well. So I agree with you, Bryce. I think the Pistons are in great shape to do that now.
There's definitely teams out there that can offer up a better all-around package in terms of players and draft capital and stuff like that. I don't think Detroit is in a bad spot in terms of contracts, some young players, even a Ron Holland right now. You just drafted a Buka Corey if it would get to that place, along with the first-round picks and the second-round picks. Let's go to break. Whenever we come back, we'll talk a few specific players, starting off with Kevin Huerter and then Ron Holland.
All right, we are back with segment 2. We're going to get to a couple more questions here. We do have one from Prasad on Kevin Huerter. Are we underestimating the amount of playing time Kevin Huerter will get? Well, I guess my initial answer to that is how much playing time do we think he'll get? Like, are we underestimating? Because I do think Kevin Huerter has a chance to be, and they're a deep team. So there are going to be some guys who deserve minutes who are just not going to play. But Kevin Huerter coming back from last season really began to find his rhythm, catch, pass, shoot guy, can really keep the offense moving. I don't feel like I'm underestimating it. I feel like he could crack the 9 or 10 man rotation because he just does a lot of stuff that they need. I don't know how you feel about that, Bryce, but personally, I don't. Maybe some fans are, who are saying $9 million is way too much, for what he gives you or whatnot. But I pretty consistently felt like that is a great contract for him, and he could definitely live up to. If not, I'll play that.
Shout out Joy here, says, love your show. Hello from Albania. Just always really cool to hear where we have viewers and listeners from all over the world. Like it is always amazing to me. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Joy, for joining us from Albania. So I do think Huerter, I was thinking about this morning on my walk. He might be the player that I have the biggest difference of opinion on compared to what the front office and the team might have. So here's what I went through. I don't know how you get him in the 10-man rotation, 0-2. So here's my thing. Here's like the process I went through. Let's just say Duncan Robinson starts, all right? Just for the sake of this conversation. K, Duncan Robinson, Ausar, John Collins, Jalen Duren, right? If somebody wants to put Isaiah Joe instead of Duncan Robinson, so be it, whatever. But let's start with those 5. Do you think Isaiah Joe is in the rotation?
Yes.
Do you think Ron Holland is in the rotation?
Yes.
Do you think Paul Reed is in the rotation?
Yes. So you're at 8 already.
That's 8. I'm at 8. So here's my next thing. Do you think one of Danis Jenkins or Abuka Corey probably needs to be in the rotation?
Yes. 100%.
That's 9.
Yeah.
So, and now we haven't talked about Taurean Prince. We haven't talked about Javonte Green and the other. So I try to get to the paths of how do you get Kevin Huerter in the rotation? I think the only way you get there in terms of the 10-man rotation doesn't mean that they can't play 11 or 12 or whatever, is the starting lineup I mentioned. And then it's like Danis Jenkins, Isaiah Joe, Huerter and Ron Holland. And Huerter and Ron Holland are your like backup 3-4 combination there with Paul Reed at the 5. I guess I can see that. That just wouldn't be my choice. Like for me, I would probably have Taurean Prince in the rotation before him. I would have Abuka Corey and then him and Danis Jenkins. And then you just move guys down a little bit. I just struggle to see Huerter in the 10-man, at least to start the regular season. Where I agree with you, and I wonder if where this is going, is when they do make this trade we've talked about, where maybe they combine 3 salaries. Now, all of a sudden, Huerter becomes your 10th man or your 9th man whenever you make that move during the regular season. Because I don't think that's a contract you sign him to trade him. I actually think he'd be more advantageous in a trade if they signed him to a shorter deal that was actually worth more money. I don't think it's a great tradable contract at just $7 million and a 3-year, and I don't even think there's a team option on it. So I think they have plans for him to be in the rotation. I just wonder if like the actual 2 deep depth chart, he doesn't end up on that until they've made an in-season trade.
Yeah, and when you actually go through the rotation, there's just certain boxes that they have to check before you get to Kevin Huerter. With any season, you have injuries and whatnot too, so that would open up more minutes. If you have a 10 or 11-man rotation, I really like Kevin Huerter's chances. Does he get into the top 9? I don't know, but he's a good player. His contract's not bad. I don't think we're I wouldn't say underrating. It's just more so the path for him to maybe crack the rotation in like a 9-man setting. It's probably a pretty big hill initially. But JB did pretty routinely go, 10 or 11 last season. So we could see him do the same thing next season and keep guys fresh for the playoffs.
Yeah, if you're the 11th man, you might play on any given game, and there's going to be a game where somebody in the top 10 of the rotation isn't available just in general, right? Injury or whatever. Wes did correct me. Huerter does have a team option on the 3rd year. So that is an important note there. Thank you to Wes. That's why he is the best. From Coney Snell, does Ron Holland at the 4 have high expectations of being his role, or is it similar to last year as of today? So I know this is something we got a little bit, I guess I got a little bit of pushback on. I think it's a huge conversation right now in terms of just who is the backup 4. Again, to shamelessly plug the Substack, I did a Taurean Prince video breakdown over there. I think it was last week. What are kind of your thoughts on let's just go Ron Holland's role in general with this team as currently constructed?
Yeah, I don't see him as a 4. I see him just kind of as big defensive wing that you put on the other team's best ball handler or wing. A lot of that is lineup dependent. Can you put him at the 4 against like a Jason Tatum? Probably. Can you do it against like some of the bigger 4s or like against the Cleveland Cavaliers or something like that? No. So positions are kind of arbitrary anyway, but I see Ron at this point as being more of a defensive specialist wing, kind of non-specific, not really positionally based, but with a SAR sense, you could put him on the opposing team's best ball handler and, sustain, pretty close to a similar level of impact, maybe for 15 or 20 minutes or however long that may be. For him to play the 4, I think will just take some growth from his game and also just body in ways that I think are difficult to project at this point.
The one thing I will say about him at the 4 is with him coming off the bench, I don't know that there's as many matchups that make you nervous as maybe if he was in the starting lineup. And so I do think that that's important for what it's worth. And I want to be fair here. Basketball Reference, I think it's a great resource. Like, it's incredible. That and Real GM, I'm on those websites all the time, every day in some capacity. But I do think sometimes their lineup data, I question a little bit, but it does have him at 48% to 51% for his career between the small forward and the power forward. And it was 25% to 75% last year. I think the bigger thing for me is I think it's just hard to play Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson together. And especially now where you don't have a floor spacing center. Like, we'll see, maybe that's something Paul Reed, how many did he make last year? What was, I meant to look this up before we recorded. So Paul Reed, yeah, he didn't take enough to really, where's he at in the totals here? I'm sorry, this is bad podcasting. He was 13 of 40 last year. So I wouldn't say that that's a big man that's really spacing the floor. I just think it's hard, Omari, to play Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson together when you also have a center that's not going to space the floor. I love the idea of it in terms of the defensive disruption and because I think Ron has become an underrated defender at this point. I thought he was incredible defensively last year. Not Ausar's level, but really, really good. But I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. And Ron, again, he could take a step forward and maybe be more of that 4 type if he, puts on a bit more weight and can maybe bang with some of those bigger guys. But I think Ron in the role he's in now is pretty perfect for him. And if he could improve as a ball handler or playmaker or shooter or whatever that may be, that's fine. But like you said, Ron might have actually been underrated defensively last year. Like, he took a really big step forward. He has a chance to be even better defensively next year, this age 21 season. But yeah, we'll see what it looks like from a minute standpoint and, where they fit him in positionally, since you can't play him and Ausar together, but he'll still continue to be a factor.
This is from PDog11. We touched on this a little bit, but your thoughts on the lineups. Will it be set in stone, or will JB experiment with the 1, 2, 3 spots to see who works best with whom? I'm thinking maybe up to late November, we could see all kinds of lineups, even when all, if healthy, a lot of interchangeable parts now. So again, we touched on this a little bit, but just your thoughts. And I know we've been talking in the private chat. Maybe you can get your thoughts out on just the depth and how that is a real talking point for this team, O2. That when you look at some of the other Eastern Conference teams, depth is going to be an issue for them in the regular season. The New York Knicks right now, I realize they're the defending NBA champs and rightfully so. And, they would be my pick right now, just out of respect for the team that just won it. But you look at their depth, especially in the front court, the 76ers, I think some other people are higher on their depth than I am, but this is going to be a question for some teams. I don't think it's a question for the Pistons right now in terms of just having 13 players you could see potentially be on an NBA floor, and that makes sense. So do you think that part of that is JB just naturally changing the rotations from one night to the next, regardless of who's available and who's not?
Yeah, I see them settling into a more consistent rotation. We saw some mixing and matching last year, and there's been some roster change this year. So, for example, I think he is going to have to mix and match with Duncan and Isaiah Joe to figure out, can you play those two guys together, or do you need to mix and match a little bit? It's Duncan. Like how much does his size factor into the lineups that work? And do you have to overcome that with Isaiah Joe maybe a little bit? And then obviously Ibuka Okori, they're going to have to, pair him in different lineups and figure out, can he play with Danis? How does he look with Cade? Can he just run the offense solo? And injuries will decide some of that as well. Beyond that, I thought they really settled into figuring out what works and what doesn't. And like we did earlier in the episode, I think you could say with some certainty what lineups we will be seeing and where they'll lean on. So maybe experimentation with the newer guys. But beyond that, I think they try to hit the ground running. And I don't know if you see the same level of experimentation we had last year.
All right, one national question here, and then we'll get into some Jalen Duren conversation to start the final segment and the questions that we've started throughout the live show here. We will get to those here after the break. But before we go to the break, this is from Ed from Auburn. In your estimation, which NBA teams have had the best offseason? So just pick one team here to start, and then we can talk through some other teams as well. We don't have to just stay with one, but just like, what's the team that jumps out to you? I kind of want to tell you that you can't pick the Sixers.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the obvious one, right?
Yeah. Do you have one other than the Sixers? Because my thing is, when you get LeBron James on a minimum, and LeBron James is still playing at the level he's playing at right now, that's just going to be a huge win. And listen, they did do other good things, right? Like the Jaylen Brown trade, the signing of Dean Wade. I think they're going to get KCP. I don't think that's official yet, but it's been reported that it's going to happen. Anthony Simons. I love that they drafted LeBaron Philon. So let's take the Sixers out of it. Who's another team that stands out to you? And Wes actually took mine. So while you continue to look through some teams here and think about it, Omari, Atlanta having a second really smart offseason in a row is Wes's opinion. I agree. I really like what Atlanta did. I went on an Atlanta Hawks podcast a couple weeks ago or something like that, and we really talked through the depth of this roster, the defensive ability of this roster, but also the ability for this roster to make a trade. So this is going to sound familiar to Detroit, but CJ McCollum on a $21 million expiring, Lou Dort, almost $18 million expiring, Jacques Landale, $14 million expiring. I believe Buddy Hields is, expiring at $10 million. So a lot of expiring money along with some really good pieces on that roster. And especially for Atlanta, this is where they're different than Detroit. I would spend another 50 games seeing what Jalen Johnson is. Is he a perennial All-NBA guy? Is he a number 2 option? What do you need to go acquire with that expiring money and potential draft pick? So I like what Atlanta did as well, Wes.
Yeah, Atlanta was a team that came to mind for me as well. I would say Toronto, assuming the Kawhi Leonard trade goes through. And there's some risk with Kawhi, I think turning 37 next year. But what they gave up for him, Brandon Ingram, Grady Dick, and picks, I thought that was a worthwhile swing for them. And then also to, basically secure his Raptors legacy. Now you can hang his jersey and get him a statue. And maybe you were going to do that anyway. But it just always felt odd that he went there for 1 year and then won a championship and left. So the Kawhi trade, I like that. And then Miami going and getting Giannis. I think they have a little bit of depth to solve, but you also got Bobby Portis, so between Giannis, Bobby Portis, and Bam, you've probably got the best power forward rotation in the East. And then obviously you could play, Giannis at center and put either of those guys at the 4 and feel pretty good. And then they also got Tim Hardaway Jr., which is going to fill a big need for them just as an outside shooter. So I figured they'll probably do at least one more thing just to get a little bit more depth. But Toronto and Miami put themselves into the contender conversation in a way that they weren't last season.
I will bring up one more team. I like the roster that Memphis has in terms of its depth and the amount of good players on that team. We'll see how they continue to move forward. Obviously getting Cam Boozer in the draft and all of that. One team I want to ask you about before we go to break. What did you think of the Lakers offseason? Obviously they make the play for Walker Kessler, give him that contract and, give up the draft capital to acquire him. They go out, they sign, they bring back Austin Reeves, but then they sign Quentin Grimes, Sandro Mamukelashvili, Colin Sexton. They've since gotten Kevon Looney, Zaire Williams, I'm missing Matisse Thybulle, all on vet minimum contracts. Just what did you think about as a team like the Lakers going into an offseason with cap space? You have Luka Doncic. Again, you end up bringing Austin Reeves back. Where do you think about where they're at right now?
Yeah, I liked their offseason, kind of. Mostly, I think. Like
you don't sound so sure.
I will say, yeah, if people don't like it, I will say that I don't viscerally dislike it like a lot of people do.
I think they're a much better team now. Like, I think they did a good job putting together a quality team for now. I am now also nervous about what position they are in moving forward. So I think it was like in the present, in the now, I think it was probably fine unless Walker Kessler becomes a more impactful player than what I think he's going to be. And I think he's a good basketball player. I'm a little bit nervous how they actually put together a championship roster around Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves. And I'm a little nervous they kind of gave away everything to continue to improve things. I may end up being wrong there. Maybe they're able to make moves in the future, but that's where I'm at. Any final thoughts on the Lakers?
Yeah, I don't know if Luka, Austin Reeves, Walker Kessler is going to win a championship, but they are a playoff team. They added some good depth pieces in Mamu and Colin Sexton and probably another guy I'm not thinking of. I don't know where they are at just from being able to go like 10 deep, right? I don't know where they are defensively because you've got a great rim protector, but I don't think any of your guys at the perimeter are stopping anybody. So it'll be interesting to see where they end up. It's sort of a weird mismatch team, and they spent a lot of money to not be a clear cut, top 4 or 5 team in the NBA. And even in the West, are they going to be that much better than Denver? And Denver's had a pretty bad offseason, but I don't know if they're that much better than Denver. I don't know if they're better than Minnesota. Obviously, you've got OKC and you've got San Antonio at the top. You still got Houston in there. So I don't know where they fall in that hierarchy. I just thought they're probably not top 4 in the West. So not a bad offseason, not an amazing offseason. I guess it was fine. I'm ending up at the Lakers offseason was fine. They're going to have to do some more stuff to get over that second hump. But, they at least will tread water and, be in the 50 wins conversation and continue to make the postseason.
All right, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we have a couple questions about Jalen Duren, and then we will get into some of the questions you ask us in the live chat here. If you have any of those, continue to put them in there. We'll go for another 20 minutes right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and we're going to put our safety goggles on because I think we're going to get into some Jalen Duren discussion, which as we get deeper into the offseason, it feels like this conversation, at least with fans, is just becoming a bit more fraught. I've said this before. I don't think fans should take the standoff stuff too personally, but we have a question here from V Prasad. Is there a downside for the Pistons or Duren to do a flat deal for more money, but is less of a future cap hit? So I guess an example of a deal like that would just be like a flat 35, 175, which I'll pass it off to you first, but I do think there is some upside to a flat deal rather than maybe a deal that steadily increases 8%.
I think this is something a lot of fans have been thinking about, and I get it. I fully understand the idea. It makes a lot of sense to me in terms of where the Pistons are cap-wise right now. Can you essentially, quote-unquote, front-load the contract? I've even had people reach out to me about a descending contract. And, right now, can you give him whatever it'd be, 45 million in the first year, and then it goes down from there, or 40, whatever the numbers end up being. We have seen the Pistons do a flat contract. That was Isaiah Stewart's deal. Obviously, that was a little less money. So from a team perspective, obviously that helps you in future years in terms of the percentage of the cap that Jalen Duren would be on the cap sheet for. The downside for the team is if you decide or you get to the point where you want to extend this player, now that may be more difficult because of what that final year number is. I will give you the present day example of this, and Wes is going to love this because this was a great call by him. Denny Avdia has turned into a near all NBA level player. Denny Avdia might be on the best contract in the NBA, but because Denny Avdia only makes $12 million in 27-28, extending him off that number is really, really difficult. Now, that's an extreme example, but that would be the potential downside to a descending contract or even a flat contract. And I also want to point out real quick, O2, on the descending, it's the 5% or 8%, just like in increasing contract. You can't go like 50 million down to like 35. And then it'd be 5%. It's incremental. And the percentage max, I think, is 8%. And I think that would be the case for Duren because of, everything. So just the way it could go up by 8%, it could go down by 8%. From the player perspective, I don't know this enough to the downside of that. I guess it would also be the extension numbers. I mean, I think there's an argument, right, that you get some more money up front and then being able to have that and invest it or do whatever you want with it. But that's kind of how I see the idea of a flat or a descending contract.
Yeah, flat or descending, it's just a smaller percentage of the cap year by year, which then opens up more flexibility across the rest of the roster. But yeah, because extensions are extended off of the last year of their current deal. If you're making less than 5 years or 4 years or however long that deal is, then you are now. Let's say they did 3 years, 120. It's an average of 40 a year, but let's say they start at the 25% max figure, which would be 44. Maybe you're making, I can't do that math in my head. Let's say you're making 44 in the first year of that deal and then 35 in the last year of that deal, right? Now you're extending off at 35 instead of 44. And if Duren became a perennial all-NBA guy, could absolutely go and get the max, and you're extending off at 35. Yeah, that could end up working against you because now you can't quite afford this guy and you have to go a different route toward getting them back under contract, which is the issue that, like you said, Portland has with Denny Avdia. So
I'll give another example real quick. Jaren Jackson Jr., and I don't know if his initial contract was descending or flat or whatever, but if people remember when they gave Jaren Jackson Jr. the extension, they had to get cap space. So they got cap space, they bumped his number up, and then they extended off of that. So that's another example we've seen recently where the idea of the final year number isn't not being high enough to extend off of.
Yeah, so a lot of that, it's also possible you extend them to a declining deal and it ends up being fine because this next deal falls within the parameters of, whatever the final year of that contract is. So there's pros and cons both ways, but as they're looking to get across the finish line, I think those are some of the things we begin to look at just if it makes the offer a bit more enticing. But I think in a perfect world, the Pistons probably just get them under the framework they have now. And his contract's going up. And at the end of the 5 years or however long you sign him for, then you just figure it out from there. And also, it would have to be at least a 3-year deal for them to continue to have that flexibility to re-sign them to another deal. So we'll see what that looks like.
We'll get to the comments and those questions right after this final one from Ben Chulik. Should the Pistons have done a better job educating fans on how restricted free agency works to avoid all of these quote unquote sky is falling sentiments, either directly or through quote unquote sources? I thought this was interesting. Do you think whose job is that? Do you think it's not been done well?
Fans can educate themselves. I don't think it's the I don't think it's the team's job to educate fans. You've got the Pistons Post, for example. We talk about this stuff a lot. We have guys like Keith Smith on, to help break down the more granular cap stuff that the vast majority of us, even in media, aren't always 100% on. There's stuff online. There's all sorts of cap people online who explain this stuff. I have stuff at the Free Press. There are resources out there to learn if you want to do that. Podcasts, there are writers, there's like, if you're here now, like you are here learning about this stuff. I don't think the Pistons have that responsibility. And I do think that with each new CBA that introduces more and more cap rules, maybe what is being asked of the average fan has become more to where now you do kind of have to pull out a calculator to figure some of this stuff out.
Wait till we have to explain the lottery and especially how a second round pick gets into the position it's going to end up. Because I think I've mentioned this. The second round flips. So whatever the lottery ends up, it flips for the second round. And then even the back half of the first round flips it. Like, it is very confusing, O2.
Yeah, like the rules are getting more confusing and complicated. And I do feel for casual fans who are trying to follow this stuff, and it's just like, it's so much to keep track of. But the resources are out there. You just have to go take advantage of them. I don't think you should ever blame a franchise for not educating its fans on the specifics of the cap. They're like, that's just not their job. That's our job. So come check us out. Come tap in. Come ask us questions. That's what we're here for.
All right. From Beastly Arrow, we've added shooting, but is the roster balanced enough to have multiple shooters on the court in important stretches of the game? Don't feel great about Joe and Duncan defensively in crunch time. So, interesting question. So let's just think about that starting lineup, O2. Cade, Duncan Robinson, Ausar, John Collins, Jalen Duren. That'd be great if you could play two Ausar Thompsons. That would be an awesome defensive team. That's relatively the same floor spacing we saw from the starting lineup. But I think where you can really get the floor spacing is now off the bench with all of Isaiah Joe, Taurean Prince. I think Danius Jenkins become an underrated aspect of this now, and a guy that really knocked down catch and shoot threes. It is interesting. I'm trying to think how many of these guys can play together, but I think it's going to be a little bit better. I understand the question. I think you could play Duncan Robinson and Isaiah Joe together for short stretches, I guess would be my answer to this question specifically.
Yeah, I think you can too. They are going to have to figure out some of this stuff in crunch time. And that's not unique to the Pistons, right? Figuring out the balance between having enough defense on the floor, but also, having your shooters out there. Because there's only so many guys who are elite shooters and at least average defenders, if not plus. I don't think that's unique to the Pistons. I think the teams they play against in crunch time would be kind of weighing those same trade-offs, right? But with that said, the fact that they can have two elite shooters on the floor, I think just gives them a lot that they didn't have last year. Because sometimes it may be a scenario where, there's 2 seconds and you just need to get a shot off, right? And in that scenario, you're probably putting Duncan and Isaiah out there and not having as many concerns. There's always a trade-off whenever you have elite shooters who are not also elite defenders, because all teams have, guys who fit that category. But if you could play them together, you're going to have 5 or 6 games a year that are, decided in the final few seconds. Even just having that option then, I think can help you a lot.
I mean, here's my thing. I think depending on who you were playing against, if you had Cade Cunningham, Isaiah Joe, Duncan Robinson, Ausar Thompson on the floor, and then let's just say Jalen Duren at center, Asar's going to take the other team's best player. Cade, in a short stretch of time, can take the other team's second best player. If you're telling me Isaiah Joe has to guard the other team's third best offensive player, I think I'm okay with that, especially for short stretches, right? Like if you just felt like you needed to play this lineup, I think Isaiah Joe's better defensively than what he gets credit for. I think Wes kind of alluded to that in the chat as well. And here's the other thing I'll say. For all of the talk about Duncan Robinson's defense, how much have we talked about him getting played off the court in the regular season or the playoffs because of his defense? Like, I don't feel like it happened that much. Like, I think I really trust in the Pistons' defensive infrastructure just in general. And that's one of my takeaways from last season and then going through the offseason. Patrick asks, chance the Pistons play on Christmas Day, Omari. So how many Eastern Conference teams get Christmas Day? 6 at the most, right? Because there's 5 games.
There's 5 games. So you're looking at
at least 4 Western Conference teams, right?
Yeah. So the Knicks obviously will get one.
Philly.
The Spurs will get one. Philly will get one. OKC will get one. So that's
the
2 on each side.
Lakers.
The Pistons, I think, have a chance. I don't know if I would put money on it this year, but I do think just from a interesting team standpoint, it seems like they've been putting Cade sort of in the spotlight a lot more. I could see it happening, but there is some competition, especially now that LeBron is in the East.
Yeah, I was trying to think, like, do they have because I think
they probably want Giannis, so you have Miami.
Yeah. I was trying to think the draft picks too. So, like, does Dallas get it because Cooper Flag? You know what I mean? I don't think the Wizards are interesting, but I don't think they haven't won nearly enough to get Christmas Day. Yeah. I was just trying to go through the East. I think it depends because I think there's plenty of West teams. If they go 3 Western Conference games, then you would have Philly, New York, Miami. I think Boston, you still have Tatum. I think Boston's still going to be a good regular season team at the very least. I think it comes down to what they want in terms of Eastern Conference games versus Western Conference games. You might be right. Yeah, Dallas might not be good enough to get on Christmas Day as well. That's probably fair. They probably haven't won enough. That's probably fair. All right. Next question is from Gabe. Are you guys disappointed with the offseason? I think we marginally improved, but it's very obvious we're not winning a chip. And that bothers me knowing we're wasting another year of Cade. I will say this. I don't think this wasn't the offseason I would have tried to put together. You never know what Trajan Langdon in the front office tried to do and then didn't materialize, or maybe the asking price got too much on a trade or something like that. We'll never have those answers in terms of what they tried to do. But I would have liked this to be an offseason where we saw some sort of move to upgrade the 2 or the 4 in the lineup. And to me, you're essentially bringing back the same level of players, potentially the same player in Duncan Robinson at those spots. But I will also acknowledge I really like the depth on this team. And I know people don't like to hear it, but I like what they have in terms of the expiring contracts, the draft picks, those type of things to make a move. But it wasn't the offseason I would have envisioned.
Yeah, I don't see it as a wasted season or you're wasting a season of Cade because, again, we've seen, teams make these deals at the deadline that ended up being what they needed to get over the hump. Derek White, Aaron Gordon were deadline moves. Rasheed Wallace famously was a deadline move. So I don't necessarily buy into, the framework of if you don't do it now, it's too late and now you're just undermanned for next season. Maybe that's true a bit more for football. I think basketball, you just have, we just see teams have more flexibility in how they're able to make pretty substantial roster adjustments in the middle of a season or even right before a season. We don't necessarily see the same trade movement in the NFL as we do in the NBA. And I do think they did move the needle forward. They got a good younger option at power forward and John Collins that I think is going to really give them a lot offensively. You have more shooting with Isaiah Joe and Taurean Prince. So on paper, I think they're a much better half-court offense, or have a chance to be than they did last year, even without the addition of that quote-unquote second star or second scorer or playmaker or whatever that may be. So we'll see how that actually manifests during the season. But Cade's entering, year 2 of his Supermax. They've got time. Like I said, I think they're just now entering their main contention window. This past season was the first one that conceivably they could be described as a contender. So no, I don't think you're wasting a season with Cade. I think you go into it, you see what they look like, and you have the tools to go get that other guy basically when you want to.
All right, last one here from Mark. Is there any indication as to what Ausar is looking for in an extension? And if he's looking for as much, if not more than Duren, do you think the Pistons could justify paying all 3 of him, Cade, and JD? This was kind of the, motivation for some of the Twitter polls I've put out recently, O2, was where do you think this trio can get the Pistons to? If it's not the trio to get them to an NBA championship without another player, what can you pay those 3? And I think that's, as I alluded to earlier in the episode, I think that's the big decision and calculation that Trajan Langdon in the front office is having to make right now is if we have to go get a number 2 scorer or somebody else. Here's my answer, O2. I think those 3 players can be 3 of the 4 best players on a title team over the next 3 to 5 years, maybe even the 3 best players. But I do think that there are some issues with that, especially the Ausar-Duren combination. And I don't think any of those players, Cade being your number 1, is the number 2 offensive option. And so I think you have to have a path to get that player on the roster or developed. And so that's why I'm so interested to see what some of these contract numbers end up being.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, if you could get Ausar and Duren for a combined, their first year salary is like around 70. Then you add Cade in there, that probably still allows you to go and get that other guy. And that's, they're in, the process of negotiating those deals now, right? But I think there's an understanding from the Pistons side that these are the three you're building around. You can't build around them and then they all get max contracts, because that just doesn't leave you with too much more flexibility, and it boxes you in. And I do think you need that way out if it turns out that this group falls short of being able to be a true title contender. So there is a contract number an overall contract number for Cade, Ausar, and Duren that they are comfortable with. They're trying to, fit those things in now. But I kind of see Ausar like I see Duren. I think he's earned more money after this past season, making first team all defense. That doesn't make you a max guy. And I think the reality is that one of those two guys at least is probably going to end up being paid closer to like a high level role player, maybe star adjacent. But you're not looking at those super max numbers. I think if it's that expensive, then that kind of blows up, whatever you want from this trio, since you have to buy into it to that extent.
All right, last one here from Pistons fan 11. Thought this was a good one. Who takes Tobias Harris's place in the locker room as a leader and coach on the floor as a vet guy? You have a little bit more perspective on this, O2, being around the team. I think it's always hard to just answer this with ultimate confidence. The one name I will throw out there now is Cade Cunningham is 25 years old. And I realize that's still very young, but he has been in this league a little bit now. He has been first team All-NBA. He has been in playoffs. Yeah, I'm with Fly Monk 321. Cade is the leader now. Chili says Cade is leader. Duncan, your vet. I think that Cade, at this point, to be quite frank, you're also making $50 million plus per year. I think that this is the role. And to be clear, I think Cade will accept this role and be really good in it. Some other names are Duncan Robinson. Paul Reed's 27 years old. He's been in this league a little bit. Javonte Green, Taurean Prince. I think there are some options here. I understand the question and what Tobias Harris meant to the team, but I think you can look at the team and come up with the names that could fulfill that role.
Yeah, I was actually going to just say Cade too. And in general, this team is, slowly becoming a not young team. Cade's going into year 6. Duren's going into year 5, year 4 for Ausar, year 3 for Ron. This is not a young team like it was 2 years ago when Tobias first came in. And I don't know if you necessarily need that quote unquote vet that teaches guys how to do things from day to day, because you've already made a playoff run. You've been to the playoffs 2 years in a row. So yeah, I think it's Cade. I think it's just the guys as a whole. I don't think one guy comes in and replaces Tobias Harris. I think you just look at the locker room and you say, you guys are experienced, you guys know what it takes, and you guys collectively can, take in Ibuka and some of the other younger guys, Chaz, and show them how it's done. But beyond that, I think the experience is just built into the roster at this point. They've done this last 2 years in a row. You probably don't need a 33, 34-year-old vet to come in and serve that same role.
All right. Thank you for everybody who submitted questions on Twitter or Blue Sky. I know we didn't get to all of them. I know there was some really good trade questions and we didn't get to those in this episode. Maybe we can get to those later in the offseason, but we do appreciate all of you for your support of the podcast. Whenever you engage in terms of giving us your questions, reach out anytime. If you have any questions or want to talk Pistons basketball, NBA basketball, whatever. Thank you for everybody in the chat and the comments. Always like to highlight how good of a chat we have. How I love whenever we see the conversations between people happening in the chat. I actually really enjoy that you get to just interact there. Usually keep it pretty positive and respectful 98% of the time, which I appreciate as well. And thank you for all the questions. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Again, thank you for your support. Go check out the Motor City Hoops Substack. I have a Taurean Prince video breakdown and a Jalen Duren breakdown. Shout out to Robbie over on the Pin Down. Wes informed me that new co-host over there, which is awesome for Robbie and Wes. Love that. Thank you to Lads, as always, the best. O2, take it away, my guy.
Yes, as always, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport. And we'll talk to you all next week.